Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we bring you the politics, the pedagogy, and the practice around public education. I know last week I had mentioned that I would not be here, and but life happens sometimes. Sometimes tough parts of life, and we'll be talking about that more in future shows. We lost a very, very dear loved one to mental health issues, and so that precluded our trip to Italy for 2 weeks. So I'm here, and it just seems like especially the politics around public education just never lets up. And I didn't want a week to go by without having an opportunity to keep you abreast of the latest. So let's get started. It's October, and what happens in October? What didn't happen last October? Halloween, right? Dr. Fauci said, not so much last year, right? But this year, he has given the go-ahead to have Halloween. And so let's see what, between he and the CDC, what they're saying. So he says, I think that particularly if you're vaccinated, you can get out there and enjoy it. So I'm sure he's talking about parents and the older kids who maybe got vaccinated after 12. After more than 18 months under a dark cloud of coronavirus pandemic, the Halloween celebrations should be able to go ahead safely, and that's a refreshing change from last year when they were mostly canceled. As many adults and now younger Americans over the age of 12 are getting vaccinated, Fauci said trick or treat in outdoors where the risk for infection is lower should be safe for young children. This is that time that children love. It's a very important part of the year for children. So healthychildren.org recommends that families stick to the outdoor trick-or-treating and doing so in small groups. For handing out candy and other goodies, the website recommended sitting outside and lining up individually packaged treats for children to take. And so these are good strategies, right, to have a safer Halloween and probably from now on type of Halloween. Fauci also shared that the outlook for the rest of the holiday season, including Thanksgiving and Christmas, is looking good for vaccinated Americans. He went on to urge those who are unvaccinated to get their shots, and he reminds people that it's another layer of protection for individuals and their families. Pfizer coronavirus vaccine is now available for people 12 and older, ages 12 and older. The company has requested that the Food and Drug Administration authorize shots for kids between the ages of 5 and 11, and that should be happening in the next few weeks. So we might be able to get some of the younger kids vaccinated for those parents who are comfortable with that. Fauci's recommendations are in line with comments made by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky. And she shared that children should be able to safely go on Halloween in small groups, she says, outdoors. If you're able to be outdoors, absolutely limit crowds. She says, I wouldn't necessarily go to a crowded Halloween party, but I think we should be able to let our kids go trick-or-treating in small groups. And I keep hearing that from both of them, small groups. If you're able to, then earlier this month, the CDC caused some confusion about recommendations for those looking to celebrate fall and winter celebrations. Unlike last year, trick-or-treating, I guess it helps to turn the page. Let's see. Previously posted outdated guidelines on the CDC website recommended keeping windows open and family meetings brief, but that is not the last word on the 2021 holidays recommendations from them. The CDC said it's in the process of updating its advice for Americans to safely observe the upcoming holidays. So be on the lookout for that. And it's not like we have to live and die by what the CDC and Dr. Fauci say, but they really do come up with some good safety recommendations. Like, for example, the Halloween ones where we have people putting their individually packaged candy out there. I mean, granted, you've got kids who might swipe all of them, but so you sit there by the front door and you welcome kids to come and take one, and that way they're not reaching into a basket and touching several. I mean, those, and so let's put it in perspective. Why would we do that the rest of our lives during Halloween trick-or-treat visits? because it keeps not only coronavirus from spreading, but flu, common cold, some of the other germ cooties that kids carry with them all, especially during the winter, the colder months. So it's just a good idea to do all this. Now, as far as I was reading a couple articles about Halloween in schools, and I know a school in Seattle was reluctant to have any more Halloween parades. They said they had noticed that many of their kids of color did not participate, asked to be isolated during that time, which I'm going to have to believe them. I'm not seeing that in our schools that are mostly brown and black, but they wanted to be more inclusive, so they have canceled the Halloween parade in the school and said, take part in it out in your neighborhoods. Now, I know that when I was principal, even 20 years ago, and then as superintendent of schools for the last 9 years, we never had a Halloween parade because there were many religions that found that offensive, and we didn't want to offend anybody. And we found it actually more instructional to have a book character parade. And so kids were asked to dress up as their favorite book character. And then we would certainly go on a parade and go to the middle school, and the middle school had been prepped with candy pieces, and they give candy pieces to the little ones as they paraded by in their book character outfits. So I'm sort of surprised to read that we still have schools that were doing Halloween parades. That I thought that had gone out a while back, but you've heard me say that in education, it can take 20, 30 years for us to catch up with ourselves, right? So thanks to COVID, we're catching up a lot faster in some areas, right? Here's the politics side is up again with this interesting article that sort of validates why I do these podcasts. And so we'll talk a little bit after that. After this, Texas could lose trillions if COVID-19 learning gaps are not closed, says the Education Commissioner. The Education Commissioner of Texas, Mike Morath, was at a Dallas Region Chamber of Commerce meeting this week, and he was the keynote speaker. He does this every year, sort of a state of the public ed for Texas. And he did not have happy news. He mentioned, based on data, he's a real big data guy. And so based on the data that he's been getting from the state test that was taken last year, Texas is squaring off against a cataclysmic challenge, according to the Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath. If Texas can't find a way to catch up from learning losses suffered during the pandemic, the state's public school students will lose trillions in lifetime earning potential. This is the largest problem facing public education and the state of Texas. Morath shared those thoughts during a sobering half-hour presentation as the keynote speaker. And here are a few takeaways. Historic declines for Texas students. Prior to the coronavirus, Texas students had seen 10 years of unadulterated improvement in reading and math. The gains weren't across the board. For example, less than 1 in 3 graduates held a bachelor or associate degree or trade credentials after 6 years after high school. Some of you have heard me say that it is necessary for schools to keep track of their graduates for a minimum of 2 years. I'm sort of surprised they have 6 years of data, but we must monitor the amount of graduates, high school graduates, that go on to either college, a vocational school, or the military. So that way, that helps the state know if we're anywhere near meeting the 360 goal that they want. 3660 goal, which is by 2036, 60% of all graduates will be college graduates or vocational and so forth. And that's just not, let's just say that we're not on track right now. It looks like So over the last 10 years, we've had improvements. They weren't fantastic, but they were the best that they'd ever been, he said. The momentum has come to a screeching halt over the last 18 months as schools and society have struggled with the disruptions that have come with the coronavirus. In fact, some key metrics the state has lost in some of the key metrics, the state has lost at least a decade's worth of progress. The number of students on grade level in math in both 3rd and 8th grade dropped by nearly 20%, falling back to percentages not seen since 2012. For individual students, the decline in proficiency could manifest itself in children lacking basic knowledge and skills. Like when a 3rd grader doesn't have his times tables memorized. And I don't know if you all remember, but that's a real problem because not only do you need that for your times table, but you really need it to be able to divide too, right? You have to know how to multiply as the foundational piece to go on to division and so forth. And they've regressed. As a result of the declines, the state needs to be able to close these deficiencies and fast. But Morath acknowledged that public school systems have historically struggled with that type of work. He pointed to some of the major disruptions to student learning in the United States, and gave the example of the 2005 Hurricane Katrina example. The diaspora from the natural disaster left hundreds of thousands of New Orleans residents away from their homes for more than a year after the storm, and many never returned. And he says, after 4 years of intense intervention, students did in fact catch up to the state averages in reading, but they never caught up in math. And that really brings back memories. I was working for Dallas ISD when, and in central office for the deputy superintendent, when that happened. And I remember I was part of being in charge of getting schools ready for these students to come in. We received thousands of students, and we really had to work hard with them. They came in very behind, and we had to struggle to catch them up. And the state also had to learn how to work with the schools who had received those students to not punish them when the school dipped in their state scores. So there's a lot of things going on. You know, it's very nice to say we're going to receive students from hurricane-torn New Orleans, but that ended up being a tough thing to do. You had students coming in from another state into schools, and there was rivalries. There was trying to find your niche and your place, you know, as a high school student. It was interesting times. I was part of that. So the bad news here is even if they do catch up in reading, they don't seem to catch up in math. And he pointed to similar results from other events in Argentina, Germany, and Iran that led to similar student learning loss. Our track record at accelerating instruction, accelerating learning, getting kids to learn more than a year's worth of content in a year's worth of time has not been strong, he said. He pointed to a cohort of Texas 3rd graders from 2017 that did not meet grade level in math. By that time, the approximately 85,000 students made it to, by the time those 85,000 students made it to 5th grade, only about 6,000 had been caught up to grade level. So 6,000 out of the 85,000. All across all grades and subjects, our track record for catching students up is about 4%. This is deeply troubling. It's a deeply troubling truth, he said. So what are the ramifications? Talking to an audience of educators and business leaders, Morath drew a picture of the state's financial future if the gaps were not closed. Basing his calculations on the premise that state achievement levels determined by assessments are strongly linked to lifetime earnings, Morath said if declines aren't addressed, the state's students would lose on average 6% of their earning potential, or approximately $100,000 over their lifetime. Cumulatively, that could mean a reduction in the state's gross domestic product of about $2 trillion. And it has other implications, folks. I did my speech at the graduation of our high school students this year talked about the need for them to go on to college. And it literally was a sort of life and death situation. Kids who graduate from college tend to live 6 or 7 years longer than kids who only graduate with a high school degree or less. Now, you wonder why that is, and it's because they have more access to medical insurance. And so they take better care of themselves and they live longer. So not only are we in trouble as far as having kids not earn as much, but the chances of the bulk of them that would have gone to college, maybe not going to college and having minimum wage jobs or less, lower wage jobs to where their benefits are either too expensive to buy or just not as good as the college graduates. It's all tied together. So this is important, and we need to pay attention to this. It's not a hypothetical future, he said. This is going to be our actual future. Morath said the state has already embarked on a series of changes designed to cut the learning loss, several of which actually predated the pandemic, and he's right about that. I remember the October before February of pandemic, I remember being in a meeting with him, and he was very proud of a couple of different programs he was introducing that had been passed into law. And so he's correct in that. And some of them were additional instructional days, more rigorous instruction, and more rigorous instructional materials, boosting and strengthening teacher development and retention, and high impact tutoring. Extending the school day is also something that some districts are doing, checking with students more often, and then goal setting with them. That's something that we did always after an assessment, after many assessments, and that's something that not all districts do. They really should. So that was a suggestion that Grand Prairie in the Dallas area was doing. And teacher incentive program. One of the things that was introduced before the pandemic was a teacher incentive program to get teachers to six figures. Now, it's not an overnight thing. It's a program where teachers work hard to meet rubric evaluations, and then they earn the first tier. The first tier earns them $5,000 from the state, not the district. The state pays that for the next 5 years, or if they get their national boards, if they pass their national board, teacher boards, they get $5,000 for the next 5 years. Then and of course they're working towards the second tier. The second tier gets them about $15,000 for the next 5 years. And then they are constantly working towards the third highest one. And that's where they could earn up to $30,000 extra a year on top of their district salary, which might be $60,000, $70,000 already by the time they're able to make that happen and reach that exemplary status. So all of those things were starting to be in place before the pandemic. Now, what's happening to sort of derail that? We have very tired teachers. We have teachers who are feeling very underpaid and overworked. And I'm seeing a lot of teacher resignations happening. I'm part of teacher threads on Facebook, and there are teachers asking what will happen if they just quit right now. They're just tired. And so it leaves me with the understanding that we administrators need to get better at knowing how to support our teachers. We thought we were going to start this great third year, and then we had mask mandates and vaccine mandates and not mandates and back and forth mandates, and the courts getting involved. And so that has really played havoc in the schools with parents and teachers and administrators and school boards, to the point where, if you'll remember, I think it was last week, I was talking about the federal government having to step in and train administrators and school boards and how to de-escalate angry parents. And now we have angry parents saying they don't appreciate the federal government coming in and saying that they need to teach administrators how to control parents. So it's still a mess. So, and I'll continue talking about other messes in just a minute. Let me finish this piece. So the commissioner praised the work of the schools in Dallas County, pointing out that many districts have early adopters to these initiatives, such as pushing students to college credit programs or rethinking teacher pay and evaluation systems. Morath, who's a former Dallas ISD trustee, lauded the superintendent of Dallas ISD for his work in developing the PTech, which is Pathways in Technology in Early College High Schools. The state will open 69 new PTech schools in 2022. Dallas County schools are responsible for 13% of all the associate degrees earned by Texas high school students in 2020. Think about that, 13% of all the associate degrees earned by Texas students in Texas. So Dallas is leading the way in doing that. It's not only Dallas ISD, but it's Mesquite ISD, Richardson ISD. You have Garland, a lot of Dallas County districts that have started pushing college initiatives down into their high schools. So it looks like that's paying off. So good for them for that. And finally, we'll talk a little bit and revisit, because things are still messy, right? We're going to revisit something that we talked about in September, early September, and that was an article where I brought the information that there were districts all over the country that were being impacted by the loss of bus drivers or the lack of bus drivers, lunch people, custodians, and there were a variety of reasons. And so when this article came out, it generated a lot of comments, and the author of the article sort of brought all of these hundreds of comments together into another article that I thought I'd bring to you so that I can keep you updated on what's happening out there. It's just, things still aren't anywhere near, when I say back to normal, maybe I shouldn't use that, because back to normal, we don't want to go back to normal. That wasn't strong enough for what we need now. But it's stifling our creativity maybe, or it's distracting us from being creative. But the Education Week had published the article by Mark Lieberman about no bus drivers, custodians, or subs, what's really behind the school's staffing shortages. It attracted a dizzying response from readers, with hundreds weighing in on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. They shared stories of frustration and fatigue with the mechanics of the hiring process, with chronic lack of pay and robust benefits for back-breaking work, with a dearth of affordable childcare options that would allow more parents to consider returning to work. Some expressed concern and anger about the still developing federal requirements for school employees to get COVID-19 vaccines. The others said the potential for COVID-19 infection on the job has kept them home. The comments paint a picture of the diverse and interlocking reasons why schools are struggling to hire workers. They challenge conventional wisdom that teachers simply are too lazy to work, or that offering more money alone will entice people back to the workplaces they consider unpleasant or dangerous. And they're talking about our school districts, folks, unpleasant or dangerous. So, several people said the lack of benefits like health insurance and retirement contributions are more frustrating than the low pay rates, particularly because those benefits have worsened over time. Years ago, a bus driver got full retirement and medical benefits at no cost to them, and that's what brought them in. Now we get retirement that we have to pay for, and medical that costs almost as much as it does on the marketplace. If they just put the benefits back, the pay would be fine. I pay over 70% of my gross pay for medical and retirement. For many commentators, the steep cost of finding people to watch children during the school day outweighs the potential value of taking one of those jobs. This issue is particular concern as COVID surges continue across the country. One parent said she wants a job at school, but she wasn't sure she'd be able to take time off if her young child, unvaccinated child, got exposed to COVID-19 and had to quarantine. And that's a really valid concern. I'm wanting to work part-time, but I can't tell an employer after a couple of weeks on the job that my third grader is required to quarantine, so I'm out for 2 weeks at home. So several teachers said that they think other school employees deserve better. I've had so many absences in my class due to bus drivers in my district. They deserve a living wage with benefits and a retirement plan. So school personnel offices are stretched thin. The district bureaucracies can be difficult for employees to navigate. One person with a part-time permanent role wrote out that they still hadn't received a school ID nearly 1 month after the school year started. Now I hear a desperate need and I laugh and say they probably have 50 people that are in the process of looking for a job while the district takes a month to hire. Requirements for some jobs can be intimidating. I signed up to be a bus driver. The requirements are staggering, said one person. There's over 100 safety checks that must be done before going out in the morning. That's excellent for our kids' safety, but I'm not begrudging that. But if you did one thing out of order and you went back to it, you're gone. It isn't worth $15 an hour. And so you see here, you're hearing that people want to work, but districts can be messy. And you've heard me say that whenever I am asked by a parent to help them advocate over a case, over an issue, I've never lost a case, frankly, yet, because I can count on the schools being messy. I can count on schools being bureaucratic, oftentimes not really following the law as strictly as they should. And they're used to having the power on their side. So we've got to get ourselves ready and better able to hire people who are there to support what needs to be done at school, right? This last sentence says, the whole system is a mess and it isn't worth $80 a day to risk getting sick, said one person. Others said their district is no longer requiring masks, so they no longer feel safe being among unvaccinated children and adults while on the job. So we come back to why we need to stay abreast of what's happening in schools. Folks, we have got to make sure that you become a stronger advocate for public education. You've got to be in touch with your legislators, even during the off season. When they're not in session, they need to hear your voice. They need to hear your concern about the schools not being funded as much as they should be, especially now that we know that we need more money for interventions. Yes, the federal government has given us extra money, but it's not going to last forever. It has to be carefully used, and it's really only 3 years. Our kids are with us for 15 years, many of them, preschool and on up. And so you heard that it takes 4 years sometimes to get kids on grade level, at least in reading. We didn't catch them up in math. We need to learn how to do that better. There's just so much we have to do, and we need your help. So educators, parents, all of us need to become a better advocate for our kids who we need to have graduate, not hourly wage employees, but going on to higher paying jobs that involve college or vocational school, or even going to the military where they can get free college there. All right, everyone, as always, our time is fast. I hope it's content rich. And if you have questions, put them in the comment section. Even if you watch this later and not live, I'll be notified and I'll be able to get back to you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great week.